What if I told you that helping your own family could lead to the most devastating betrayal of your life, leaving you utterly broke and consumed by a burning desire for retribution? My name is Evelyn Reed, and I lived that nightmare. For years, I poured my heart, soul, and every spare penny into keeping my sister Carol and her husband Mark afloat. I believed I was being a good sister, a loving aunt to their kids. I thought I was securing a future for all of us. But what I actually did was pave the road to my own financial ruin, setting the stage for a discovery so shocking, it would shatter my world into a million pieces. I remember the exact moment the resentment began to fester. It was a sweltering July afternoon in Phoenix, the kind where the air conditioning just can't keep up. Carol called, her voice tight with desperation. Their landlord was threatening eviction again. This wasn't a new story. For 5 years, it had been a relentless cycle. Late rent notices, utility shut to off warnings, endless pleas for just a little help to get through this month. Each time I'd sigh, open my checking account and transfer the money. My savings, the nest egg I'd worked decades to build, slowly chipped away. I was living frugally, delaying my own retirement plans, all to keep a roof over their heads. I made countless sacrifices, postponing car repairs, canceling vacations, even putting off a much-needed knee surgery because family comes first. Then came the day I discovered the truth, the moment that turned my resentment into a cold, hard knot of betrayal in my gut. It started innocently enough. Mark, always a smooth talker, had convinced me to co-sign a small loan for a new business venture he swore was a sure thing. He needed my good credit to get approved. He promised it was just a formality, a few signatures, and he'd handle everything. I reluctantly agreed, swayed by his fervent assurances and Carol's tearful pleas about their children's future. Months passed, and I heard nothing about the loan, just the usual requests for rent money. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived from the bank. It wasn't addressed to Mark, it was addressed to me. Inside, a collection notice. The loan, which Mark had sworn he was diligently repaying, was in severe default. Not just a month or two behind, but 6 months. The principal amount was far larger than he had initially claimed, and the interest had ballooned. My credit score, a source of pride for decades, had plummeted. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't just a missed payment, this was deliberate deception. I called Carol, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. She feigned ignorance, then quickly shifted to tears, blaming Mark, blaming their financial woes. But something in her voice didn't ring true. It was too practiced, too convenient. The seeds of doubt, once scattered, now took root and began to choke out every ounce of my trust. That night, I couldn't sleep. The betrayal gnawed at me. I started digging, pulling up old bank statements, cross-referencing dates and amounts. The more I looked, the more a horrifying pattern emerged. The rent payments I'd sent directly to their landlord? Many of them had been immediately withdrawn from the landlord's account and funneled back into Carol and Mark's personal accounts. The utilities I'd paid? Often unnecessary, as their accounts were already current. I wasn't paying their bills. I was funding their lifestyle, a lifestyle that seemed to include new cars, expensive electronics, and lavish vacations, all while I scraped by. The obsession began then. I couldn't stop. Every waking moment was consumed by unraveling the tangled web of their lies. I hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Frank Miller, known for his relentless pursuit of the truth. He started uncovering things that made my stomach churn. Fake invoices, doctored receipts, even a shell company Mark had set up, supposedly for his business, but which was actually a conduit for siphoning off money. The hidden debt wasn't just the co-signed loan. It was a mountain of credit card debt, luxury purchases, and even a down payment on a new motorhome, all acquired while I was literally paying their rent. Frank's final discovery was the most devastating. He found a recorded phone conversation between Carol and Mark. In it, Carol laughed, saying, "Evelyn's such a soft touch. She'll never know. She just keeps sending money, bless her heart." Mark chuckled in agreement. My own sister, the one I had sacrificed everything for, saw me as nothing more than an ATM, a naive fool to be exploited. The sound of her voice, laced with such callous disregard, ignited a firestorm of rage within me. My heart ached, not just from the financial loss, but from the shattering of a bond I thought was unbreakable. I had felt abandoned after paying their rent. But this was an active, calculated betrayal. My world had imploded, and I knew with a chilling certainty that I would not rest until I had confronted them, until I had seen them face the consequences of their deceit. What happened next would change all our lives forever. The scent of stale coffee and desperation clung to my clothes, a constant reminder of the life I'd built, brick by agonizing brick, for someone else. My name is Arthur Vance, and for years, I believed I was doing the right thing. I believed in family, in loyalty, in sacrificing my own comfort for the people I loved. That belief, however, became the very chain that bound me to a nightmare. It started subtly, as these things often do. My sister Clara, a woman whose charm could disarm a bank vault, found herself in a familiar predicament, behind on rent, facing eviction, and with 2 young kids in tow. She called me, her voice trembling, painting a vivid picture of homelessness, of her children out on the street. My heart, ever the softest part of me, crumbled. I had a decent job, a modest but stable life. She had nothing, or so she claimed. I remember the first time I transferred the money. $500. It felt like a lot, a significant chunk of my carefully saved emergency fund. But it was for family, I reasoned, for Clara. She promised to pay me back, of course, a promise that would echo hollowly through the years, growing fainter with each passing month. That initial $500 was merely the down payment on a debt that would eventually consume my entire existence. A few weeks later, another call. This time, it was an urgent plea for another month's rent. The landlord was threatening legal action. The kids were scared. The narrative was always the same, expertly crafted to tug at my heartstrings and exploit my inherent need to protect my family. I sent more money, then more. The amounts grew, the frequency increased, and soon, a significant portion of my monthly income was being diverted to Clara's ever-present emergencies. My own apartment, a small 2-bedroom in a decent part of the city, started to feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. I stopped going out with friends, skipped meals, and wore the same worn-out clothes for years. My car, a reliable but aging sedan, was a constant source of anxiety. Any repair meant less money for Clara. I was living paycheck to paycheck, but not for myself. I was living paycheck to paycheck for her. The resentment began to fester, a slow-burning ember in my chest. I saw pictures of Clara on social media, always smiling, always dressed in new clothes, enjoying dinners out with friends. There were no signs of the destitution she constantly described to me. Each photo felt like a punch, a cruel mockery of my sacrifices. I'd call her, my voice strained, asking about repayment, about her plans. To get back on her feet. She'd always have an excuse, a new crisis, a fresh reason why she couldn't possibly contribute. "Arthur, you know I'd pay you back if I could," she'd say, her voice dripping with feigned sincerity. "It's just so hard right now. The kids need new shoes. My car broke down." "You wouldn't want them to suffer, would you?" And just like that, the guilt would wash over me, momentarily extinguishing the flames of my anger. I was trapped, caught between my dwindling resources and my unwavering, if increasingly misguided, sense of familial duty. One particularly harsh winter, my furnace broke. The temperatures plummeted, and my apartment became an icebox. I called Clara, hoping, just hoping, she might offer some small gesture of support, given how much I'd done for her. Her response was a casual dismissal. "Oh, that's rough, Arthur. But I really need this month's rent. The landlord is being a real jerk." I shivered, wrapped in blankets, looking at the growing stack of bills on my kitchen table, and a new emotion began to stir within me. A deep, profound sense of betrayal. It wasn't just the money anymore. It was the complete disregard for my well-being, the casual expectation that I would always be there, an endless well of financial support, while she lived a life of apparent ease. The idea that she might be deliberately misleading me, that her pleas for help were calculated manipulations, started to take root in my mind. It was a terrifying thought, one I desperately tried to push away, but it persisted, gnawing at me like a hungry rat. I started keeping a meticulous ledger, a secret record of every dollar I'd sent her, every bill I'd covered, every loan that was never repaid. The number grew, an astronomical sum that made my stomach churn. It wasn't just rent anymore. It was utility bills, groceries, school supplies, even occasional emergencies like a new flat-screen TV because hers had broken. Each entry in that ledger was a fresh stab of pain, a tangible representation of how much of my life I had given away. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday, a day that started like any other, but ended with my world tilting on its axis. I received a certified letter, an official-looking envelope from the county clerk's office. My heart pounded as I tore it open. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't a jury summons. It was a notice of foreclosure on a property I didn't even know existed. The property listed was under Clara's name. My sister, who claimed to be perpetually on the brink of homelessness, owned a house, and it was about to be repossessed. This wasn't just about rent anymore. This was a lie, a colossal deception that had stolen years of my life and every penny I owned. My resentment transformed into something far darker, far more dangerous. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Clara, my sister, the one I had sacrificed everything for, owned a house. Not just any house, but one that was about to be repossessed. Meaning she hadn't just been living off my generosity. She had been actively squandering it, using my hard-earned money to maintain a facade of respectability while letting her own assets crumble. The anger, a slow burn that had simmered for years, ignited into a raging inferno. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the deliberate, calculated deception. I spent the next few days in a daze, the world around me blurring into an insignificant backdrop. Every memory of Clara, every plea for help, every tearful phone call, replayed in my mind, now tainted with the bitter taste of manipulation. The image of her children, the supposed victims in her elaborate charade, now felt like props in a cruel play. My own sacrifices, the skipped meals, the worn-out clothes, the endless worry, all for a lie. It was unbearable. The resentment I felt transformed into something far colder, far more dangerous. It hardened into an unyielding resolve. I needed answers, not just for myself, but for the ghost of the naive brother I used to be. My first step was to discreetly investigate the property. The internet, a treasure trove of public records, became my weapon. I found the address, the purchase date, and even the mortgage details. It was all there, laid bare for anyone to see, confirming the depth of Clara's deceit. The house was a modest suburban home. Nothing extravagant, but it was hers. It had been hers for years, long before the first desperate call for rent money. The sheer audacity of her lies was staggering. The next piece of the puzzle involved her emergencies. I started cross-referencing the dates of her pleas with my bank statements. Each time she called, each time I sent money, there was no corresponding record of a payment to a landlord, no utility bill. The money just vanished into the ether of her life, fueling what I now realized was a lifestyle she couldn't genuinely afford. She wasn't just struggling, she was living beyond her means, using me as her personal ATM, all while maintaining the illusion of poverty. The depth of her casual cruelty was breathtaking. I needed to understand the full scope of her financial situation, not just the house. I remembered her mentioning a new job a few years back, a position at a local real estate office. With a surge of adrenaline, I decided to pay them a visit. Posing as a prospective client, I subtly steered the conversation toward Clara, casually asking about her success there. The receptionist, a chatty woman named Brenda, was more than happy to oblige. Oh, Clara? She was a whirlwind. Left about a year ago, though. Said she was going to pursue her own ventures. My heart pounded in my chest. Her own ventures? I inquired, trying to keep my voice even. Brenda nodded, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. Yes, something about buying and flipping properties. Always had a knack for finding a deal, that one. Very persuasive. Flipping properties. The words echoed in my mind, a chilling confirmation of my suspicions. Clara wasn't just struggling. She was actively trying to build a real estate empire, using my money as her initial investment, her safety net, her personal financial cushion. The thought made my blood run cold. She had leveraged my love, my trust, my very existence, for her own avarice. This wasn't just about paying her rent. This was about funding her dreams while I withered away. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and obsessive research. I delved deeper into public records, searching for any other properties linked to Clara. It was like peeling back layers of an onion, each revelation more shocking than the last. I discovered not one, but 2 other properties, both smaller, both purchased within the last 3 years. One had already been sold for a tidy profit, the other was currently listed on the market. She wasn't just a homeowner, she was a fledgling real estate investor, all funded by my selfless, misguided generosity. The financial strain on me had been immense, forcing me to cut corners, to deny myself even the smallest comforts. Meanwhile, Clara was quietly building a portfolio, turning my sacrifices into her personal fortune. The injustice of it all was a suffocating weight. I replayed every conversation, every desperate plea, every fabricated crisis. The memory of her tear-filled eyes, now seen through the lens of betrayal, transformed into a grotesque mask of deceit. My anger solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just hurt, I was furious, and I knew with absolute certainty that this could not stand. The time for passive acceptance was over. The time for reckoning had begun. My resolve hardened, each memory a fresh spark igniting the inferno within me. The time for reckoning had indeed begun, but I knew I couldn't simply confront Clara. That would be too easy, too quick, and frankly, too merciful. She deserved to understand the depth of her transgressions, to feel a fraction of the burden she had so carelessly placed upon my shoulders. My initial anger began to morph into something more calculated, a cold, strategic fury that sought not just an end to the charade, but a definitive, undeniable victory. I started by systematically cutting off the financial tap. This wasn't a sudden, dramatic declaration. It was a slow, deliberate withdrawal. The first time Clara called with another emergency, I feigned a sudden, unexpected expense of my own. My car, I claimed, needed a major repair, costing thousands. Her usual theatrical sighs and thinly veiled guilt trips were met with my own carefully constructed narrative of hardship. It was a strange role reversal, one that felt both liberating and deeply unsettling. She pressed, of course, her voice laced with an entitlement that now grated on my nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. I held firm. "I just don't have it, Clara," I said, my voice steady, though my stomach churned with a mix of anxiety and perverse satisfaction. "I wish I did, but I'm barely making ends meet myself these days." The silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to her usual verbose pleas. Her calls became more frequent, then more desperate. The carefully crafted tales of woe escalated. The children, always the children, were now facing dire circumstances. They were hungry, they were cold, they were on the verge of being removed from her custody. Each fabrication was a fresh insult, a blatant attempt to manipulate the emotional levers she had so expertly installed within me over the years. But the levers were broken now, corroded by resentment and the bitter taste of betrayal. I listened, my face impassive, my heart a block of ice. I offered vague sympathies, empty promises of looking into things, and always, the same unwavering message: "I just can't, Clara. I'm tapped out. The true turning point, the moment my obsession truly took root, came when I began to investigate. I started subtly, a quiet search on social media, a casual conversation with a distant cousin. What I uncovered was a tapestry of lies so intricate, so audacious, it made my blood run cold. Clara wasn't struggling, she was thriving. Not in the way I had imagined, through hard work or honest living, but through a carefully constructed illusion of poverty that she had been peddling to anyone who would listen, and more importantly, anyone who would pay. The cousin, bless her gossipy heart, mentioned a new car, a recent vacation, and even a lavish birthday party Clara had thrown for herself just months prior. My mind reeled. While I was skipping meals and wearing threadbare clothes, Clara was living a life of relative luxury, funded by my sacrifices. The resentment I felt before was merely a prelude. This was pure, unadulterated rage. The bitterness that had been simmering within me for so long now boiled over, scalding my very soul. I found photos online, carefully hidden within private groups, but accessible enough if you knew where to look. There she was, Clara, beaming, holding up a glass of champagne, standing next to a brand new SUV. Her children, far from being deprived, looked happy, well-fed, and dressed in clothes that were certainly not hand-me-downs from a struggling relative. The sheer audacity of it all was breathtaking. Every sob story, every tearful phone call, every emergency was a calculated performance, designed to extract money from my pocket and funnel it directly into her extravagant lifestyle. The betrayal was a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air. It wasn't just the money, it was the years of emotional manipulation, the constant anxiety, the gnawing guilt I had carried for not being able to do more. She hadn't just taken my money, she had stolen my peace of mind, my financial security, and perhaps most painfully, my faith in family. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. Clara wasn't a victim, she was a predator, and I had been her most reliable prey. This wasn't about getting my money back anymore. This was about something far deeper, far more primal. This was about justice. My mind, once clouded by misplaced loyalty, now saw with chilling clarity. I would not just stop giving her money. I would expose her. I would dismantle her carefully constructed facade, brick by agonizing brick, just as she had dismantled my life. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing by her rules. The quiet, unassuming Arthur was gone. In his place stood a man consumed by a singular, burning purpose. The hunt had begun. The hunt began with a deep dive into the digital abyss. I started with public records, searching for any discrepancies, any paper trail that didn't align with Clara's carefully constructed narrative of perpetual victimhood. It was tedious work, hours blurring into days, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a growing sense of righteous indignation. I scoured property records, tax filings, and even old social media posts, piecing together fragments of a life she'd meticulously hidden from me. The image of the desperate, struggling single mother began to crack, revealing something far more insidious beneath. My first real lead came from an unexpected place, a local real estate forum. Someone had posted about a rental property, a charming little duplex, that had recently been sold. The poster mentioned the previous tenant, a Clara M. who had always paid her rent on time, sometimes even early, and had been a model resident. Clara M. My blood ran cold. The address wasn't the one she'd given me for her eviction crisis. It was in a completely different, much nicer part of town. The pieces started to fall into place, forming a picture I never wanted to see. She hadn't been facing homelessness. She'd been living comfortably, while I starved myself to send her money. The betrayal burned like acid. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the deliberate, calculated manipulation of my trust, my love, my very sense of family. The resentment I'd harbored began to morph into something sharper, more focused, a burning desire for justice. I needed more than just an address. I needed proof, undeniable evidence that would shatter her facade once and for all. I spent weeks cross-referencing names, addresses, and dates. It felt like I was unraveling a complex web, each thread leading to another shocking revelation. The next discovery hit me like a physical blow. I found an online obituary for an elderly woman, a distant aunt I barely remembered, who had passed away a few years prior. The executor of her modest estate was listed as Clara. Not Clara M., just Clara. The will, a public document, revealed a small but significant inheritance, enough to cover several months of rent, utilities, and more. She had received this money around the same time she began her most intense pleas for financial help from me. The sheer audacity, the cold-hearted deceit, left me speechless. She wasn't just struggling, she was actively deceiving me while sitting on a nest egg. The betrayal deepened, transforming into a visceral ache in my chest. I couldn't confront her yet. Not without all the facts. I needed to build an airtight case, a mountain of evidence so overwhelming that she couldn't possibly deny it. My obsession grew, consuming my waking hours and invading my dreams. I became a phantom, a shadow lurking in the digital world, piecing together the true story of Clara's life. Every late-night search, every archived document, every obscure forum post felt like a small victory, a tiny chip in the fortress of her lies. The biggest bombshell, however, was yet to come. It was hidden deep within the labyrinth of county property records, a deed transfer filed years ago. Clara had purchased a small house, not rented it. A house. While I was living paycheck to paycheck, sacrificing my own well-being to keep her afloat, she had been a homeowner. The house was modest, yes, but it was hers, bought outright with no mortgage. The purchase date coincided precisely with the period when her emergencies became most frequent and most desperate. She had used my money, my hard-earned savings, to maintain a lifestyle she could already afford, a lifestyle that included property ownership. The rage that surged through me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just anger, it was a profound sense of violation, a complete shattering of my reality. Every sacrifice, every skipped meal, every worn-out piece of clothing, every ounce of emotional energy I had poured into her became a searing indictment of her character. She hadn't just taken my money, she had taken my dignity, my peace of mind, my belief in the inherent goodness of family. This wasn't merely a matter of financial restitution anymore. This was about reclaiming my narrative, exposing the truth, and ensuring that no one else would fall victim to her elaborate schemes. I felt a surge of cold determination, a clarity born from the ashes of my shattered illusions. I printed out every document, every screenshot, every piece of damning evidence. The stack grew, a physical manifestation of her deceit. Each page was a testament to her calculated cruelty, a chapter in the story of my profound betrayal. I knew I couldn't just present this information to her in a quiet conversation. Clara thrived on drama, on controlling the narrative. She would twist, deny, and manipulate until the truth was unrecognizable. No, this required a public reckoning. A confrontation so undeniable, so thoroughly documented, that she would have no room to maneuver, no shadows in which to hide. The thought of her face, stripped of its practiced charm, filled me with a grim satisfaction. The justice I sought would not be swift, but it would be absolute. I spent days refining my strategy, planning every detail of the impending confrontation. I considered involving other family members, people who, like me, had been ensnared in her web of lies. My parents, for instance, had also sent her money over the years, though not to the extent I had. They too believed her stories of hardship and struggle. The thought of exposing their own daughter, of shattering their illusions, was painful, but necessary. This wasn't just about my pain. It was about the collective deception she had perpetrated against our entire family. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I discovered a series of loans she had taken out from various payday lenders, all while claiming abject poverty to me. These weren't small, desperate loans, they were significant sums, repaid with alarming regularity. It wasn't about surviving, It was about maintaining a lavish facade. She was juggling multiple income streams, including mine, to fund a life of comfortable deceit. The hidden debt wasn't hers. It was the debt she created for me. The emotional and financial burden I carried while she flourished. My hands trembled as I organized the final stack of documents. The time for quiet investigation was over. The time for reckoning was upon us. I had become an architect of truth, meticulously constructing the edifice that would house her downfall. The resentment had given way to an icy resolve, the betrayal to an unshakable determination. My obsession had culminated in this moment, the precipice of a confrontation that would either destroy her or destroy me. There was no turning back. The stage was set. The air in the courthouse waiting room was thick with unspoken anxieties, a palpable tension that mirrored the storm brewing inside me. I sat there, my heart a drum against my ribs, watching Clara across the room. She was a different woman now, the carefully constructed facade of victimhood crumbling around her. Her usual vibrant clothes were replaced by a muted gray suit, her once sparkling eyes now darting nervously, betraying the fear she tried so hard to conceal. My meticulous planning, the sleepless nights spent poring over documents, the endless conversations with my lawyer, it all culminated in this moment. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice, about reclaiming my life from the wreckage she had made of it. When our names were called, a cold wave washed over me, instantly replaced by a surge of adrenaline. As we walked down the sterile hallway, each step echoed the finality of what was about to unfold. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, but the weight of its purpose felt immense. I took my seat, my gaze fixed forward, refusing to meet Clara's eyes. She sat with her lawyer, a man whose slicked-back hair and condescending smirk perfectly embodied everything I despised about her world. The proceedings began, a blur of legal jargon and procedural formalities. Then, my lawyer, Ms. Hayes, a woman whose calm demeanor belied a razor-sharp intellect, began to present our case. She laid out the evidence I had painstakingly collected, the bank statements showing the transfers, the meticulously dated text messages, the recorded phone calls where Clara's pleas for money grew increasingly desperate. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall I was building, a wall that would eventually imprison her in her own lies. The courtroom was silent, save for Miss Hayes's clear, unwavering voice, as she dissected Clara's narrative of hardship, exposing it for the elaborate charade it truly was. Then came the moment of the hidden debt. Miss Hayes paused, her eyes sweeping across the room before landing on Clara. "And then, Your Honor," she stated, her voice dropping slightly for emphasis, "we uncovered a substantial undisclosed debt." Clara flinched, a subtle tremor running through her. My heart hammered. This was it. This was the revelation that would shatter her carefully constructed reality. Ms. Hayes presented the documents, loan agreements, credit card statements, and even a mortgage on a property I never knew Clara owned, all hidden, all contributing to her fabricated financial woes. The amounts were staggering, far exceeding anything I had ever given her, revealing a lifestyle of reckless spending and deceit. Clara's lawyer, visibly rattled, objected, but the judge allowed the evidence. The color drained from Clara's face, her composure finally cracking. The courtroom buzzed with a low murmur. I watched her, a strange mix of vindication and sorrow swirling within me. This wasn't the Clara I had known, the sister I had loved and protected. This was a stranger, a master manipulator unmasked. When it was her turn to testify, Clara's voice was a shaky whisper, a stark contrast to her usual booming confidence. She tried to deny, to deflect, to paint herself as the victim of circumstance. But her words lacked conviction. The weight of the evidence, the sheer volume of her deception, crushed her. Her carefully rehearsed lines dissolved into stammering excuses, her once magnetic charm now replaced by a desperate, pathetic plea. The hidden debt, the cornerstone of my case, became the millstone around her neck. The cross-examination was brutal. Miss Hayes, with surgical precision, dismantled every one of Clara's claims. She exposed the lies, highlighted the inconsistencies, and revealed the calculated nature of her manipulation. Clara's eyes, once so skilled at feigning innocence, now held a raw, unadulterated fear. She was cornered, her escape routes cut off. The truth, ugly and undeniable, was laid bare for everyone to see. As the judge delivered the verdict, a wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. It wasn't just about the money I would recover. It was about the validation, the acknowledgement that I wasn't crazy, that my feelings of betrayal were justified. Clara was ordered to repay a substantial portion of the money, and more importantly, the truth about her deceit was now on public record. She sat there, defeated, her head bowed, the once powerful Clara reduced to a shell of her former self. I had won, but the victory felt bittersweet. The cost had been immense, not just financially but emotionally. The sister I once knew was gone, replaced by a stranger I barely recognized. The chapter of my life dominated by her lies was finally closing, but the scars I knew would remain. The silence in that sterile courtroom was deafening, a stark contrast to the cacophony of emotions raging inside me. Clara, my sister, sat across from me, her face a mask of defeat, her shoulders slumped. The judge's gavel had just fallen, sealing her fate and mine. The verdict, though expected, still landed with a dull thud in the pit of my stomach. She was ordered to pay back every penny, plus interest, and faced a substantial fine for the fraudulent claims she'd made. Justice, as they say, had been served. Yet the taste in my mouth was not of triumph, but of ashes. I watched her, a woman I had once loved fiercely, now a stranger broken by her own deceit. The years of financial bleeding, the emotional manipulation, the constant fear of her next emergency. It all culminated in this moment. I had fought for this, meticulously gathering evidence, enduring her tearful pleas and venomous accusations. I had sacrificed my peace, my savings, and a significant part of my soul to bring her to account. And now, here we were. Leaving the courthouse, the crisp autumn air felt like a slap. I expected a surge of relief, a triumphant march into a new, unburdened future. Instead, a profound weariness settled over me. The battle was over, but the war had left deep wounds. I had won, yes, but at what cost? My relationship with Clara, once a complex tapestry of shared memories and unspoken understanding, was irrevocably shredded. There was no going back, no mending what had been so thoroughly broken. My phone buzzed. It was my lawyer, his voice chipper, congratulating me on the outcome. I thanked him, my voice flat, and ended the call. He didn't understand. How could he? He saw a legal victory, a client vindicated. I saw the wreckage of a family, the ghost of a sister who had chosen greed over kinship. The financial burden would eventually lift. The empty bank account would slowly refill. But the emotional void, the gaping hole where trust and affection once resided, felt permanent. Driving home, the city lights blurred into streaks of color, mirroring the chaotic swirl of my thoughts. I thought about the initial $500, a small sum that had snowballed into a mountain of debt and despair. I remembered the late-night calls, the fabricated stories, the way she had weaponized her children to extract money from me. Each memory was a fresh sting, a reminder of my own naivety and her calculated cruelty. The revenge, if that's what it was, felt hollow. I hadn't sought to destroy Clara. I had sought to stop the destruction she was wreaking on my life. I had wanted her to acknowledge the pain she caused, to feel the weak HT of her actions. But sitting there, watching her broken, I realized that true acknowledgement might never come. Her defeat was not my triumph, it was simply the inevitable consequence of her choices. Days turned into weeks, and the echoes of the courtroom faded, replaced by a quiet, persistent ache. I started rebuilding my life, slowly, deliberately. I picked up extra shifts, started saving again, and even allowed myself a small indulgence, a new pair of shoes, something I hadn't bought for myself in years. Each step felt like an act of defiance against the past, a reclamation of my own agency. One evening I received a letter. It was from Clara. My heart pounded as I tore it open, bracing myself for another torrent of blame or manipulation. Instead, it was short, almost terse. She admitted her wrongdoing, not with remorse, but with a detached acceptance. She wrote that she understood why I had done what I did, that she had brought it upon herself. There was no apology, no plea for forgiveness. Just a cold, hard acknowledgement of the facts. It wasn't the heartfelt confession I might have once craved, the tearful reconciliation scene from a movie. It was something far more real, far more chilling. It was the final severing, the acknowledgement that our paths had diverged so completely that there was no common ground left. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as a memento, but as a bookmark in the story of my life. The chapter of my life dominated by her lies was finally closed. The scars I knew would remain, faint but indelible reminders of a painful lesson. But they were my scars, earned in a battle I had fought and won. And as I looked out at the quiet street, a sense of peace, fragile but real, began to settle over me. It was a bittersweet closure, a hard-won freedom, and the beginning of a new, unwritten story, one where I was finally the author of my own destiny. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, a heavy blanket of anticipation. Every eye was on me, then on the judge, then back to me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the final, desperate moments of a long, brutal war. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, about proving to myself that I wasn't just some naive fool to be used and discarded. The air crackled with the weight of years of resentment, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of what I knew, deep down, was right. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man whose quiet determination had become my anchor, squeezed my arm gently. "Clara," he whispered, "this is it." His words were a faint echo against the roar of my own thoughts. I looked across the aisle directly at them. The couple who had once been my closest friends, the ones I had helped without question, now sat there, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and defiance. They had tried to paint me as the villain, the bitter woman seeking to destroy their lives, but the truth, the raw, ugly truth, was finally laid bare for everyone to see. The judge cleared his throat, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the building. He began to speak, his voice a steady drone, outlining the facts, the evidence, the undeniable paper trail of their deception. Each word was a nail in the coffin of their lies, each sentence a vindication of my unwavering belief in my own story. I remembered the night I discovered the hidden debt, the shock that had ripped through me, the feeling of the world tilting on its axis. That moment had been the turning point, the spark that ignited the fire of my resolve. Then came the verdict. Guilty. The single word hung in the air, thick with finality. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, but for me, it was as if a massive weight had been lifted from my chest. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also a profound sadness for the friendship that had been so brutally murdered by greed. They stared at me, their eyes wide, their carefully constructed facade crumbling before my very eyes. There was no apology, no remorse, just the stark realization of their downfall. And in that moment, I understood that I hadn't just sought justice. I had found a form of closure I hadn't known I desperately needed. The aftermath was a blur of paperwork, legal proceedings, and the slow, arduous process of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The money, the house, the years of struggle. It all started to fall back into place, piece by painful piece. But the true victory wasn't in the financial recovery, it was in the restoration of my own self-worth. I had stood up for myself, fought for what I believed in, and emerged from the wreckage stronger, wiser, and undeniably changed. I often think about that final confrontation, the intensity of their desperate denials, my unwavering resolve. It wasn't about revenge in the end, not really. It was about defining my boundaries, about refusing to be a victim, about honoring the person I knew I was meant to be. The journey had been long and arduous, filled with moments of doubt and despair. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, days I questioned if I had the strength to continue. But each time, a flicker of that initial resentment, that deep-seated sense of betrayal, would reignite my resolve. Now, months later, I sit in my renovated living room, a space that finally feels like home again. The sun streams through the window, illuminating a new painting on the wall, a vibrant landscape that speaks of new beginnings. The scars of the past remain, subtle reminders of the battles fought and won, but they no longer define me. I learned that true justice isn't always about vengeance. Sometimes, it's simply about setting things right, about finding peace within yourself, and about moving forward with a clear conscience. The cost was high, yes, but the lessons learned, the strength discovered, were immeasurable. I had found my bittersweet closure, and in doing so, I had finally found myself.